I've just hit the record button, so go ahead.
Great. Thanks, everyone. I'm Jeff Flood with the Virginia Coastal Zone Management Program, and I'm co-facilitating this work group in the subcommittee with Katie Register of Clean Virginia Waterways. So I'll just, for the benefit of those who will be reviewing this recording later, I'll just give a very brief high-level overview of the previous meetings and kind of the purpose of the work group. We were formed back in December and early January, had our first meeting there of the overall work group to bring together stakeholders of nonprofits, private voters, marina organizations, state agencies, federal staff, and any other interested parties to tackle this issue of abandoned and derelict vessels in both our coastal waterways and our inland lakes and other water bodies. So we had a very good meeting on January 5th to kind of kick things off. Followed that up with a kind of breaking out the subcommittees. The first meeting of the Law and Policy Subcommittee was on February 10th and had a guest speaker from North Carolina, their boat administrator, give an overview of lessons learned. And Gary Jacobs with LNG Marine Towing gave some perspective on the removal process and the liability there. The first meeting of this subcommittee, the funding one, was on February 19th, and we looked over a variety of issues, funding sources, the cost of removal, liability again, disposal information, and fees potentially to levy from either local government, local association, or state agency to add to maybe an ADV fund. Then we branched out to have the removal subcommittee led by Megan Keys of DEQ to look at landfills, contractors, removal logistics, and they will be looking towards the policy funding subcommittees just to have some guidance there. And then Jessica Steelman of Accomack Northampton Planning District Commission is leading our outreach and prevention. And again, more introductions and goals for that, and waiting to see how things come out of these two committees here, the funding being us today and the policy. And we also had another work group meeting on March 3rd with some guest speakers from Rhode Island and Oregon, again, sharing lessons learned. And then our policy subcommittee met for a second time last Friday, March 19th. And we had some updates from Virginia's Coastal Policy Center at William & Mary Law School. And we're joined again with Anthony here today, I believe, just to give some updates on that. And we had some really great perspectives from Ed Tillett from Waterway Media Guides, and we'll be sharing that kind of recap of some of his lessons learned and how to rope in the insurance company and industry, and have some solutions there. And then we also went over sort of a list of questions to ask some other states, just to have an apples to apples comparison across the board and some of their fee structures. And how they administer those fees and how much and how they collect them, that sort of thing. So we're going to do a recap of those again today and get this subcommittee's input before we launch some interviews with other states. So that's all I got, Katie. I will turn it over to you here. And can everyone see the agenda up there?
Yep.
Great. Okay.
Thank you, Jeff. Yeah, so we're making progress. All the subcommittees are very, very active right now. And at Friday's meeting that we had about law and policy, we did hear from Ed Tillett, who is the editor-in-chief of Waterway Guides. And he talked to us about conversations that were being held in Georgia with insurance companies to see if there was interest in having, sorry, I've got horrible allergies today. To see if there was interest in having either mandatory or voluntary insurance coverage that would cover the removal of boats that sink or cover them through the disposal process. So that was a conversation we had in Georgia about this insurance policy option. As you can imagine, there seems to be mixed thoughts on it. The cost would be high or it would add insurance costs to boaters if this was required. And the question is, would it cover just boats once they sank? Somebody pointed out on our call on Friday that the kind of people who have boats that become derelict are often not the same people who would be keeping active on insuring their boats. We definitely heard that from marinas, especially that a lot of the boats that are abandoned in the marinas are actually from people who either are no longer sailing, they're older and they're no longer interested, or they have died, or they are otherwise without financial resources. So, any rate, it's part of the mix of solutions that we'll be looking at. Many of you were on the call last Friday. Is there anything else that Ed talked about insurance that I missed? And if so, I'd love to have you chime in right now. All right. Well, hearing nothing, then the next thing we're going to be talking about are the interviews that Jeff just talked about, that we intend to talk to many other states about additional fees that they have in place and how those systems work. So I guess I'll go back to you, Jeff, to talk about those interviews that we'll be having.
Sure, and if Katie, if you can take over for admitting people in
Sure.
as they're coming in here while I'm focusing on this. So real quick, we did kind of skip over the inventory, which is a very short update. Many of you know I've been working on getting a spreadsheet, started with the Coast Guard, having about 170 vessels since 2013. And we've had since then about 22 entries. And from what I can kind of tease out of that, it's about 15 kind of actual reports. Some were duplicative, others were multiple vessels for the same location, everything like that. So we're getting up there a little shy of 200 ADVs from what we can reckon. So that's something that'll be kind of the foundation of building these things, building inventory, pricing out things with more cost data based on habitat. Are they causing environmental harm? Are they a navigational hazard? And those sort of things. So we'll have the committee help with which parameter is the most important to kind of weigh these things going forward. So we're working on that. That's just a brief update. So to Katie's point about the additional fees, she's sharing right here, I believe. So the abandoned vessels poster, is everyone seeing that, or are they still seeing the agenda?
They should be seeing the poster.
Okay, poster. So this is a nice PDF that Virginia Whitmer of the CZM staff has put together. She's our outreach coordinator. So we're going to be looking to submit this to other through EdTele or through a list of contacts he's provided of marinas to get it out there and provide some print copies or have them print it, whatever works out to really get this out on bulletin boards at marinas so that people can take a QR code scan at the bottom right there and then have access to that same inventory that I just referenced. We're using a Google Forms survey that we've distributed several times throughout this larger group chain here. So to get an idea of the additional fees, I'm going to stop sharing this guy and I want to go. Is everyone seeing a list of ADV issues, or do I need to reshare my screen?
You have to reshare.
Okay, let me do that real quick. Here we go. How about now?
Yes.
Excellent. Okay, so we shared this again, so this will be kind of a recap for some folks who were on the policy subcommittee on Friday, but we did go through this list. I kind of went through it pretty rapidly and then kind of paused for questions. I'm happy to go through it a little slower and have people just kind of comment on things here. We did have one comment at the end from Neil Harrington with Smith Mountain Lake talking about collection of fees and from boats that are in other states. So some people want to dump their boat here, or someone is doing some activity and the vessel seems to be abandoned. How would we tackle something from Maryland or North Carolina or any other state for that matter? But really, we're just trying to, as I said earlier, get an idea, an apples to apples comparison with other states, being and kind of paralleling what Anthony with Coastal Policy Center is doing and look at these other states' fee structures. So really happy to have your feedback. We wanted to get both committees' feedback, not only because this is a policy issue, but a financial one. So it bridges both committees. So this is really going back to one of the updates from lessons learned from Oregon's State Marine Board, who was a guest speaker at the March 3rd overall group. How does your state, define ADV? Is it abandoned and derelict? Are there separate definitions, or is it sort of a two-tier check, different boxes? And then how do you prioritize those? If it's abandoned on land, if it's not really derelict, what does that mean? Is it in danger of being derelict? That sort of thing. So We want to make sure those definitions are straightforward and but at the same time very comprehensive. Recreational and commercial vessels, that's another thing. We've known from some previous research and anecdotal stories here that recreational vessels seem to be a little bit smaller and therefore easier to remove just based on the volume versus a commercial fishing vessel. In North Carolina, our guest speaker about a month ago mentioned that they spent about 10% of their $1 million that was allocated from their state assembly to just clean up one 60-foot shrimp trawler that had been dislodged in recent hurricanes. So that just goes to show how much money can go towards one vessel and how you prioritize those things. Boating insurance, we touched on that with Ed Tillett's recap. This is something that we would think would be a good policy issue, but again, if there's anything that comes out of that, levels of insurance, a mandate, incentive to not get insurance, whatever those things are. And also, I'll scroll down here, unintended consequences are really huge. We really want to hear that. That's the stuff that we rely on you folks here helping us out to kind of take a look at this and review it, see things we've missed. Titling has come up with this committee for sure, and tracking the last owner. We get into the fee fund. We had an interview with a local lake association, and they suggested that having a fee that covered more than just ADVs would appeal to inland marinas, and they're working on water quality issues. So that kind of gives everyone a stake in the game here, and it's not just about coastal ADVs or inland ADVs. Everyone kind of think about holistically about improving the boater environment for safety and the natural environment. Politically accepted, we'll see how people want to disclose that. We've had some great guest speakers who've been pretty frank about the political climate and what really seemed like a good idea and what ultimately led it to succeed or fail. So we're hoping for some clarity and frankness on that. Methods of passing this legislation, different levels of government. Is it a local program? Is it private? Is it government? We want to have all these options on the table as a menu. Anthony's working on kind of providing that as well. So we want to complement those efforts of having a menu of options at the end of this work group. And then we're just looking at grant partners. Katie will get into that later today, more specifically with some of federal options and the local grant partners. We just want to streamline everything, make it as easy as possible, make it consumer friendly, local government friendly, and have less administrative costs. That's another thing for hiring staff, running a program. We want to explore all options, government to market solutions. We have contractor vetting and landfill requirements. Our removal subcommittee is working on that, getting a list together of requirements for landfills in the coastal zone and inland. So we want to have those options ready to go and kind of, again, next steps, be able to go, here's your menu of options. We've gotten into some interesting things talking about some fiberglass hull recycling programs. There's a pilot in Rhode Island that many of you have attended, that work group meeting that had that lecture talking about ways to just use the fuel, use as a fuel source for cement, and then other ways. And again, going back to limitations and what landfills will require. Life of product turn-in, those sort of thing, also a turn-in vessel, and that's where we get into some of these unintended consequences. So I'll leave it there and open it up for anyone's comments. We really encourage and would love to have some input on this before we share it with other states in our interviews. And again, I know many of you were on the call Friday, so
Yeah,
thank you.
no, there's a lot of overlap.
This is Neil Sturman. Good morning. Is Officer Tim Dooley on the call?
Let me see.
I saw his name.
Yes, I
Yes,
believe
he
so.
is.
I'll ask him to unmute if he's.
I was just going to ask him about the how they deal with the ADVs registered out of state.
Hey, Neil, can you hear me all right?
Sure,
Yes.
I can hear you, Tim. Good morning.
Okay. Hey, good morning. So I was on the call Friday as well, but I was having some technical difficulties and couldn't seem to get the phone to work. But yeah, as to your question, we basically are handling the out of state the same way that we handle the in state. Basically, the process would be to try to find the titled owner. And so we have some resources that we can do that, whether it be going through North Carolina's DWR, or we also have some Coast Guard databases that we can use to try to pull up. And usually we can find who the last titled owner is, but the issue that we run into over and over again is the actual last titled owner is not who the actual owner is. In other words, they've sold the boat to someone that lives in Virginia, and that person in Virginia has never bothered to go through the process of titling or registering or doing any of that type of stuff. And so then we're left with a vessel that we have no idea who the owner is and no funding or any method as far as being able to do anything with it. So, and that seems to be a recurring issue. Fortunately, we've not had, at least not, in my experience, we've not had a lot of these out-of-state vessels that are sunken. Usually these are vessels that have floated away due to a flood or something like that. And so we can secure those somewhere in the hopes that we can find the owner at a later date, or someone else is willing to, go through the process and take ownership of it. But yeah, it's a pretty similar process to what we would do with an in-state vessel.
Do you think that inventory form will help you with any of the drifting boats that happen in Smith Mountain Lake with our high water events?
Yes, absolutely. I think if we can get on board with that, because we have a lot of overlap between ourselves and various entities, the Smith Mountain Lake Volunteer Fire Department, and so there's a lot of overlap there. So I think if we can get something going, as far as knowing where they are and what they are, I think we can relieve ourselves of a lot of that duplication anyway.
Sure. Anything that helps you. Thank you.
One thing I want to hit on real quick is the registration and titling. So, and I know it came up earlier, but in my experience, Virginia's titling laws are very weak as far as, I think we could probably prevent a lot of these things if we were to shore up our titling legislation. The way the titling law reads, if a vessel spends more time in Virginia than it does another state, then that person, the owner, is supposed to title that vessel in Virginia. But just in my experience on Smith Mountain Lake, there are a ton of vessels on Smith Mountain Lake that stay on Smith Mountain Lake that never get titled in Virginia. And so I think there's some work that could be done there that would be preventative in nature, that would help out a lot as far as being able to track down the actual owner of some of these things when they do become abandoned or derelict.
How could we do? I'm sorry, go ahead, Katie.
Yeah, to clarify, boats that are kept on private water bodies do not require to be titled. Is that correct?
Yeah, so essentially, in order for a vessel to be required to be titled, we have to be able to show that it's being used on public waters in Virginia.
Okay.
Which is kind of weird, considering that ATVs, for example, an all-terrain vehicle, you have to title an all-terrain vehicle in Virginia over a certain CC, and you can't use those on public property in Virginia. So I think with a few little changes, I think our titling, we could shore up that titling issue and probably help out a lot of this stuff.
And what about people who have boats in their backyard who, they're not actively on water? Those do not have to be registered or titled, right?
Not the way the legislation currently reads, and they can sell that vessel, 5, 6, 7 times. And as long as that person never puts it on the water, we don't catch them putting it on the water, then there's no requirement to title. And so that's where you run into these vessels that you're just not able to track down the ownership.
Thank you.
Wasn't Tom Guess from DWR, wasn't he doing something about the titling where they were there was a gap there and he was trying to prevent that gap from happening? He said something about that. Do you know anything about that, Tim?
Yeah, we looked at it pretty hard a couple of years ago, and I actually wrote up some, I pulled out the pertinent legislation and wrote up proposals and that type of thing, but I don't think it's ever really been pushed at the agency level, to try to get any legislative changes made. I think it's been considered, but I don't think they've ever gone forward with it as far as legislatively. Maybe
that's something we could look into also.
Yeah, there's also the question of laws versus policies. And sometimes I think what we're talking about are policies within agencies. Is that correct?
Well, with the titling, we're dealing more with legislative. We're dealing more with the laws. The way the laws are written, I think the intention was for these vessels to be titled, but just basically the way they're written, it's not clear enough that we can do any type of enforcement with it. And we sent our proposal to the Attorney General's office, and this has probably been 3.5, maybe 4 years ago, and had them look at the current legislation, and they came back. It's not an official opinion, but they came back with their, I don't know what you call it, guidance, I suppose, basically saying that unless the vessel is on a public waterway, there's no titling requirement. So,
have you shared that with Anthony, the coastal policy team? Or could you?
I sent it to Miss Andrews, I believe, but I don't know if it's gone anywhere from there.
Anthony, can you confirm if you've seen that correspondence?
Yes, I think I have. I will double check. I was aware of this issue. I think we brought it up a couple meetings ago, the kind of gap there in the titling, and that's something I'm looking into more. But if you have any of those examples you have that forward my way would be greatly appreciated. Just so I could take a look at what maybe like a recommended change would be.
Sure, I'd be glad to. Maybe you can throw your email in the chat. I'm not sure if I have it or not.
Yes, I can do that right now.
Yeah, actually,
that is something I am bringing up in the paper.
Yeah, it's a good point that we should bring up that Anthony will be finishing up his policy paper, white paper, in the next month. So anything you've got to share, sooner the better. But thank you. Yeah, we appreciate that. So turning back to the list of questions that we will be asking other states, is there anything that we missed? Again, our goal is to, I think Jeff is going to be taking the lead on this, but our goal is to have very thorough conversations with other states, hitting all these points. And we just don't want to miss a major point and then have to call them back later. So is there any other major point you can think of that we should add to this list? No? Okay, good. And actually where Jeff is showing that right now about fees, could you go back?
Yep.
So what does it cover? If that is actually a big question we've got. We did hear from North Carolina that inland boaters that never go to the coast, felt resentment about having to pay a fee that only benefited coastal boaters. At least that was their thought. So we're very interested to find out about other states. Do they charge a fee? What do they call it? And does it include more than just ADVs in order to get freshwater boaters to understand that there's a benefit to them too? So, all right, so last call on any additions to this list of interview questions before we get busy and talk to other states.
I have one to just question to ask Sergeant Dooley, if you're still here. The liability, and you may have been at that March 3rd, or excuse me, the February 10th first funding subcommittee meeting, but Major Meyer with North Carolina, he was describing how the state, once they've got their kind of hands on the ADV, they own it. And the contractor, I think, has to, they vet them in some way. They do maybe have insurance, but really there's no liability for that contractor. So they just cut them a check and they just say, get rid of it. There was some question around the back end about disposal and how far, the state covers that versus the contractor. But how is Virginia kind of prepared? North Carolina just seemed like they had a lot of kind of legal guns ready to go and a lot of bond coverage and that sort of thing to prevent, if there was an issue, they wouldn't be a big deal if the state took that on. So it's kind of Virginia. Are we covered in that way if DWR was to kind of take the ownership of the vessels?
I would say, in my experience, which is obviously limited to Smith Mountain Lake, that we're unprepared. The approach that we've taken is that when we're able to identify the owner of one of these vessels, and we've primarily been dealing with vessels that are sunken, that need to be, basically need to be lifted and then removed. So what the approach we've been taking is just more of a liaison type of approach. And so what we'll do is we'll identify the owner, and then we'll go as far as contacting the owner and serving some sort of notice. We've been using certified letters to notify them, hey, if you don't do something with this vessel, you will be charged criminally. But that's the extent of our involvement. And then, you know, if they don't comply, and we try to work with them, we'll give them like a 30-day notice, but then we'll try to work with them. I've got one right now that we're probably 6 months in, but they are making some progress. So we're continuing to work with them without charging. But you know, if they didn't respond or didn't do anything, then we would look at going the criminal route with it. But that's really the extent of our involvement. We've not gotten involved as far as actually doing anything to lift or remove any vessels or taking any sort of ownership with them, at least not around Smith Mountain Lake. I don't know if they're doing anything different on the coast. I'm not aware of it.
Thanks. That's really good.
Sure.
That was kind of a question I've been trying to connect the dots on. So
Yeah,
anything
that goes
else?
back to- that goes back to that liability issue when you
Yep.
put a line on a boat, who's responsible and for damages or, you know, anything like that. That's a big issue.
Yep, and it would seem that from some past meetings, VMRC, you know, can do a public notice, can send letters to try to track down a boat that's been kind of blown into someone's backyard marsh area through no fault of that property owner, and then work with them to remove it. But then I think the cost is on that property owner, although there's a little bit less liability. So definitely something to look into here. So thanks again. Anything else? I'll kind of bring it back to the agenda here for you, Katie, if you like.
Yes, please.
All right. Oh boy. Give me a second here, folks. Let me stop my share for now and then reshare.
By the way, if I get kicked off, the meeting will continue and I'll just get back on as fast as I can. I say that because I got kicked off an earlier Zoom meeting. So I think the next thing on the agenda is the funding question, the grants. Is that right, Jeff?
Yep.
Okay. So
Yep, I'm getting just a second here.
the question is, if we had money, if we had like $100,000 or $200,000 in the next year or two, what kind of priorities would we have on how best to apply those funds? One of the things that we've been looking into is the possibility, and I see that Christy Kehoe from the NOAA Marine Debris Program just joined us, so you probably have to close your ears for a minute, Christy, but we are thinking of going for a NOAA Marine Debris Program removal grant. They'll be announced this summer with letters of intent. This is like a 2-page summary of a grant proposal idea. Then NOAA would look at that and they would come back to us in the fall to say, yes, take it to the next step, which is writing an extensive proposal, or no thanks, this doesn't align with our goals for this year. So those grants start, a lot of them were in the $50,000 range. A couple of them were in the $200,000 range. And there is a 1-to-1 match, which means if we are successful in getting a $100,000 grant from NOAA, then we would have to match it with another $100,000. So that is quite a lift to get a match, but hours do count. So the match doesn't have to just be in dollars, but it can be in the time and energy that many on this work group are putting into this effort. So if we were to go for this grant and line up some partners to help us with the match, what would be our priorities? So here are 4 bulleted priorities that I'd like to suggest for conversation's sake. 1, are we interested in building on the Rhode Island pilot project? That again is taking fiberglass boats, hulls, stripping them of metal and anything that's not fiberglass, grinding them up, and then taking them to a cement factory in South Carolina. Is that something we're interested in partnering on? Another is are we interested in trying a pilot voluntary turn-in program? And quite honestly, is $200,000 enough for that kind of program? Or do we want to work first with marinas to take care of the ADV issues that they've got? And we have heard that some of these boats have been in marinas for years. So there's a backlog, a legacy, if you would, of these ADVs at marinas. Or do we want to pilot a program where we work with local governments and local planning district commissions and local law enforcement? So these are just 4 early ideas, and maybe some of these could be combined. And I guess a lot of this is going to be informed by the paper that we get from Anthony in a month or 2. So at this point, I'd love to hear your thoughts on whether or not you think the timing would be right this summer to go for such a grant, if we were to get it. And Christy, here's a question for you. If we were successful, I believe the full grant would have to be submitted around Christmas or December, and then we would not find out if we got the funding until 2022 in the spring. Is that roughly correct?
Hey, Katie, and good morning, everybody. So timeline in the past historically is the announcement regarding the grant priorities and the application is typically made in late summer with early fall, let's just say September being the letter of intent process. And you're correct that if selected, the full proposal would be likely like later into fall and early winter, either through December or January. Then selection process and reviews kind of go through the spring. So notification would likely be in like spring 2022. So you're right, it does take quite a bit of time.
Okay, so this project, if funded, if successful, would actually start the fall of 2022. So
Correct.
Just so you all know that this is a long vision here. So thank you for that clarification, Christy. And so I'll open it up to the floor. What are your thoughts? Should we consider this? And what do you think of that short list of possible priorities?
I just had a question for Christy or for you, Katie. The letter of intent, what does that entail? I think we should go for it. What does that entail? Exactly what we want to use the money for?
Yes, basically it's that the full proposal is 20, 30, 40 pages. It's detailed timelines and all. The letter of intent basically says, this is who we are. This is what we hope to accomplish. This is our estimate of what the budget would cost. Here are the partners involved. So it's a very clear form that you have to fill out, but they just want big picture. And I, for one, am delighted that they switched to this letter of intent process, because writing a 30-page detailed timeline, detailed budget, and then find out that your project didn't align with their goals, it's like, wow, what a tremendous amount of time that goes into that.
Sure. Christy, does it sound like something that we would be eligible for if we?
Yeah, certainly. So, we do change or update our removal priorities on a yearly basis, and I'm not part of the removal team, so I don't have any really insight of what the priorities will be or if they'll change. I'll say historically, abandoned and derelict vessels has been one of our top priorities. So the work that you're doing in and of itself, I think, would really align. And, given the type of, partners involved, I think there could be a really strong case. So certainly I will definitely share the any application or any information notice, but I think a lot of the things proposed here do really align with our work. And perhaps something I can do for you, Katie, to share out is I'm happy to kind of pull out our the last projects funded the past few years. So that could also kind of give a picture of who's who we're working with and maybe some insight of what those projects look like. And I'm happy to share that with you and Jefferson after this call to share with the group.
Yes, thank you. I did look on your website to see the removal projects, and I looked only at those that were dealing with ADVs, as opposed to removing fishing nets or removing, consumer-based debris. But yes, I mean, anything you could share, especially reports, that would be fantastic. Like if 2 years ago, you funded an ADV program somewhere, to see their final report would really help us understand the scope of what they did compared to what we're hoping to do. So yes, anything you can share would be very, very helpful.
You got it.
Thank you. Thank you. So turning back to this list of 4, and if you have a 5th or 6th idea, please share it now. But what are your thoughts about building on the Rhode Island program, trying a voluntary turn-in program, working with marinas, or working with local governments?
Well, I guess I have an idea again.
Go ahead.
I think we should try to, I mean, they're all great ideas. We should try to prioritize the ADVs that we're coming across on an inventory and seeing which ones are navigable hazards, and maybe go after those specifically and do some concrete work getting them out of the water. Whether that's working with marinas or just in general with waterways, inland or coastal. I think maybe that's, you know, something solid, concrete that we can show that we did and get them out of the way before they cause any accidents or anything like that.
Okay, so removal of prioritized ADV. Would that be a good way to summarize that?
Sounds good.
Okay.
And I'd add, thanks, Neil, for that. I think it'd be great. I think the cost is going to, you know, as we've seen some cost estimates, how much it can take, but we've seen some lower costs. So I think if we got a couple of these things kind of under our belt and really just showed how we improved the process from the work group, and there's some legislative changes, and then boom, we're able to show that we were able to ready to go, and you can use this template in your waterway. I think that'd be really great to have both the process and the real results. So thanks.
Is anybody here from the Coast Guard that can tell us any, give us any insight as to which ones they would prioritize to remove?
Oh, we do have Erica from the Coast Guard. I'll ask her to unmute. So Erica, or anybody else from the Coast Guard or Navy, if you've got any thoughts on these priorities.
Hey, Katie, it's Erica. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, go ahead.
Hey, I'm sorry. I'm also dual hatting here at another meeting. Can you repeat the question for me?
Sure. Looking at these 4 possible priorities for a grant project that would begin in fall of 2022, which of these might be of interest or would be a priority for the Coast Guard? It could include building on the Rhode Island pilot program, where boats are reused for energy, a pilot program to turn in vessels, working with marinas to resolve the ADVs that they're stuck with, or working with local governments, law enforcement and such. And then a 5th one, which doesn't show on this agenda, would be removal of priority ADVs that are navigational hazards.
So, Kate, from my perspective and knowing our limitations of authorities, I would prioritize to work with the local governments, law enforcement, and the planning district commissions.
Okay, great, thank you. One of the things I wanted to point out too is I think a grant proposal would be stronger if we just didn't remove ADVs, which of course has to be done, but if we built capacity, you know, if we built understanding of the process. And I should tell you too, the removal and disposal subcommittee is inventorying landfills throughout Virginia as to their rules and their regulations and what they will accept. So I think if we package this as, yes, we'll remove, but we're also building capacity, and certainly working with local governments would fall in that category. So thank you, Erica. Other thoughts on possible priorities if we were to go for this? Okay.
Hey, Katie, this is Christy again. One other element that I wanted to share that was relevant to our last year's removal application is we did emphasize prevention angles to this work too. So although certainly removal is kind of the highest priority, last year we did change it up to also emphasize and have criteria tied to prevention. So I think that just kind of makes the case stronger with all the different committees that are working on this, that potentially another angle to include as well.
Great, thank you very much. Another big issue that we would have to discuss probably in the next month or two is if this work group is interested in pursuing this, what entity would actually submit the proposal and do the work. And as I understand it, staff time can be part of these grants. So that's something else to consider, is who would do the work of, contacting the local governments and law enforcement, if that's the route we're going to go, working on prevention. Who does it make sense to do the fiscal management of these grants? And it is a lot of work and record keeping. And I'm not sure if, Christy, are state agencies eligible for these grants? For example, if we thought that the Department of Wildlife Resources was a logical fiscal manager of this grant, would they qualify?
Yes, state and local entities can qualify.
Okay. I should mention too that Clean Virginia Waterways, the group I run, has contributed to and had 3 of these grants. One of the challenges, though, if Clean Virginia Waterways were to be the lead on this, is colleges take a chunk for indirect costs. And so $100,000 in a grant, for example, would end up being a lot less than $100,000 working actually on the grant. So that's just something else to be part of the mix. So I guess this will be a lot more discussions going forward, perhaps. And I say Department of Wildlife Resources because of their current roles with ADVs, but it could be another agency. Any thoughts? Concerns?
How about the VMRC? Would they be able to do anything to help us with that?
That would be a second state agency that possibly could. But yeah, we'd have to have conversations with them to see if they've got the capacity, or maybe this grant would be able to hire a part-time consultant who could add to the capacity of a state agency to administer this program. Any other thoughts? And real quickly, we can talk about the match. So again, if we were to ask for 100,000, we would need 100,000 match. And a portion of that would be many of you on this phone call, contributing your hours would be part of that match, but we would have to come up with some dollars. Does anyone have thoughts on that? Okay. Well, the 2 early thoughts I have on possible financial matches, like dollars not in kind, could be possibly the corporations that own Smith Mountain Lake and Lake Anna, who have not yet been part of these conversations. But that's a possibility. There's also the Virginia Environmental Endowment, which might be willing to support this, not the whole thing, not the whole match, but a portion of it.
Katie, I know AEP does have some kind of grants that they give out. And I did ask them about this before this group started. So we might be able to, maybe we could approach them with how to get a grant from them, AEP from Smith Mountain Lake.
Okay, yes. it would be premature now to have those conversations with them,
Mhm.
but I think the timeline here is we get the paper from Anthony, we look at the recommendations, we see what are the recommendations will require a legal process or, changing laws. And then with his recommendations, plus the work of all of our subcommittees, figure out what is a feasible grant. And I believe these grants are usually 2 years, but could be 3. Is that true, Christina? Sorry, we're throwing all these questions at you, or Christina.
No, I'm happy to help. Yeah, so typically it is 2 years. Some projects, I want to say, might have 3 years, but I'd say the average is 2 years,
Okay.
24 months.
Okay. Which goes really fast when you have one of these big projects. Okay. Any other thoughts? And this would just be if we went for the NOAA marine debris removal grant. It would just be a pilot. It would be a starter. It would be something to get us moving with boots on the ground. It would not be a long-term source of funding. I mean, we still, I think, need to pursue longer term funding sources. So I guess
I
that's
guess
it. Yes, go ahead.
I'm sorry. I guess I just had a question for Christy. When she said it's a 2-year program, does that mean whatever we're granted each year, or is that a total amount for the 2 years?
So it's the total amount for the 2 years. So typically, for example, if it was a $100,000 project, that would be allocated over those 2 years only.
Right.
Okay.
And that's part of the proposal that, if we get invited to submit a full proposal, we need to do a year by year breakdown on how we propose to spend the money. All right. Any other thoughts on this funding issue, or really any other funding issue, since we are the funding subcommittee? All right. Well, if not, then I guess back to you, Jeff, on wrap up and next steps. Thank you, everyone.
Yes, thank you so much for just being here. It's just a great discussion, just little things. Again, this is what we wanted to have, some Q&A and just some ideas that we may have missed. So thank you again. We're ahead of schedule here, so I'd love to let you all off early here. So we're thinking the next meeting of this Law and Policy Subcommittee, I believe I need to send a doodle poll. There are so many of them out there, but we don't want to overwhelm you. So here is a preview, is the April 19th, the 22nd, and the 23rd. We're trying to keep a relatively regular schedule, kind of on the heels of the previous committee, and that was February 19th. So kind of a monthly basis, we like to have the subcommittees meet, but not have them too scrunched up against each other. So that's just a preview. I'll be sending out that doodle poll. It'll probably be in one of Katie's email recaps in a couple of days here. So that's really it. We well, for you guys, it's going to be probably mid to late April, again, in that range, as we had Friday being the policy, the 19th, today, Monday, the 22nd, funding. So just look for something in that area. Again, a lot of cross-pollination overlap. So we're trying to keep it succinct and just one email blast to give some updates on folks. So again, look for that in a couple of days. And that's all I have. Any comments, questions, concerns, anything? We'll wrap up here.
I just thought of a question, just popped in my head, and it's for Anthony. Do you have an estimated date that you'll be sharing your policy paper with us? We didn't know if you were going to wait till after finals or before finals, or what your schedule is.
That is a good question, and I will need to get back to you on that. But so it'd be sometime, if it's before finals, it'd be, late April. If it's after finals, it'd be, the second week of May. So sometime in that range. If it's not before or after, I can't really say that, but I will talk to Elizabeth and see what she wants to do on that.
Very good. Thank you.
Right. Well, great. Any last call for anything for us, folks? Let you out early. Great. Okay. All right, Katie, I'll turn it back to you.
All right. Well, thank you,
Yeah.
everybody. We certainly appreciate your time today, and you can always email Jeff or myself if you've got thoughts, ideas, especially about funding. So thanks again. Goodbye.
Thank you. Thanks for your work. Have a good day.
Hey.